I'm talking loud enough, I'll just step it up and we'll, still on? Okay. Okay, we don't need to channel Jimi Hendrix and we'll continue on. But the 20-year horizon is, you know, if it's needed for a large development, the city will probably need to have, we currently are using HDR to run the model to come up with this. The document provides standardized contents for an impact study, just so there's no questions. Here's the size of development. This is what you've got going into it. Impacts, thresholds. Ideally, you know, you want to make sure that you're not hammering the capacity of the facility you're accessing. One thing, and we'll get into it, is you know, the traffic impact study will define and give you guidance on what improvements are needed to, or what the impact of the facility is, but it doesn't tell you how to fund it. Something we'll talk about later is what happens if this facility says we need to upgrade this signal, however that signal has shared responsibility. It doesn't talk about how to fund that. That's something we will have to work with on a case-by-case basis. Defines who can do this. You really don't want folks, like I would not want to do a transportation impact study. I don't do them. I can read them, but I probably want somebody to help me interpret it. Basically needs to be a licensed engineer in Kansas with experience for impact studies. There is a higher level qualification that's a professional traffic operations engineer. If we were to require that, then by ethics, we'd have to hire a PTOE to review it. So in this case, keep it at basically competent professional engineers with demonstrated experience. There are exception processes. Essentially, you can't construct or modify entrances without access without city approval. It does give the city engineer the ability to waive requirements or alter them with certain limits where it's impractical. And then it also sets up waiver processes and an appeals process. Should staff make a decision, the developer doesn't agree, he can appeal to the council for a decision. One of the criteria, though, if they do want to vary from the standards of the access management, then they would have to hire an engineer to demonstrate the impacts of those, to provide documentation as to why their request should be considered. The next steps, I'd like to bring this back for adoption as basically by an ordinance. Under state law, we can publish this document and then include it by reference in an ordinance. Just file copies as appropriate places, make sure it's available, but the state law allows you to refer to a bound document as published. As soon as we will be able to bring this back to you for consideration to the first meeting in May. Some issues we need to look at in the future are, once again, the issue of traffic signals needed at this intersection. Okay, this development causes part of it, but it also will serve other properties. One of the concepts is first in, too bad, so sad you pay. However, you know, other concepts would be to create a benefit district to build it, deal with it later through the collection of fees, have a transportation development district to take care of it. But these are some things we'll have to address in the future. Right now, we've dealt with them in the past. The way we've dealt with them in the past is through a development agreement. Our developer agreement as developments come in before we seal the deal. I think that's the best way to handle it in the short term. Long range, get a policy, but every case will be different. Then I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Is this written by a consultant, or did we write this?
The document was, 99% of the document was written by HDR, who prepared our transportation impact statement. Staff, Celia Duran and myself have gone through and reviewed it. We've hired Jeff McCarroll with Trans Systems to assist us in a peer review. He at one point was the traffic engineer at Lee Summit and adopted a policy, so we wanted to have a second opinion by someone who actually went through the adoption process and implementation to help us. Jim Hubbard has reviewed it. There's a couple of sections that were a little more specialized, and I retained Stinson, Morrison, and Hecker, a law firm dealing with development issues, to review those. So it's been written professionally, reviewed by staff, and reviewed professionally.
And when was this done? I mean, was this was a study paid for?
This was the original document was prepared in 2009. We've been meaning to get to it sooner. However, just with staff and workload, we haven't been able to. I've been pushing forward. Had Mr. McCarroll help us beginning in 2010, and then we've revived it to get this adopted.
And so what is the cost of
the original cost?
All this?
Can't remember offhand the cost of the original transportation study. With Trans Systems, I have basically an hourly not to exceed $5,000 for it. Have a not to exceed $2,500 with Stinson, Morrison, and Hecker for their review. And had Celia Duran assisting me on the side. I think I have a not to exceed $5,000 for her.
Just curious, David, I know a lot of the sources that were cited in the draft were 2003, 2004, 2001. Do you know if any of them have had to go back and amend their original drafts to make improvements, and have those been noted and learned from for us 9, 10?
The only ones that are going through an update are Overland Park. This was done with the most recent versions of the Overland Park and Lee Summit. So it's in line, and we do have a summary sheet just comparing it to theirs, and it's pretty much the same.
Would anything in the document change any existing plans or current projects that we have in the work? I mean, for instance, right here at the intersection, does it change anything that we already have planned as far as the access points and things?
It would not change those. We are working with the property owners to improve things. You may run into there will be places in code and existing standards that may conflict with this. However, one of the criteria of this document is to basically, if it's in conflict, this would supersede. So basically, we have the ability to apply the most restrictive of the two based on our professional judgment.
Looking at the section on restricted medians, because, I mean, as I read it, it seemed that if it hits this, then we have to put in some sort of restricted median. I was curious how much more medians increase the cost of a project. For instance, if it was outside or out front of Casey, if that dictated because it's 4 lanes wide, if we decided, or if we had to widen it, we have to put a median in. How much more expensive does that make since we put a policy in place that? One
place you'll run into is there's a lot of locations, and I will say that Center of Maine is one where in a perfect world you would be looking at some medians. It's not possible.
No land.
There's not room, so you just have to accept. Moonlight in Maine went through. We were able to acquire the land and install medians in the interest of safety and capacity. But it's a case where you'll have to look at it on a design basis. Some of the other cities, their plan has always been for medians. Gardner's really has not. But as I say, I think short term, probably most of the projects all of us will be seeing, it's going to be at the intersections. South Center Street, in another world, it's probably would have been great to have designed it for a median, but that wasn't the choice when that went through. It just wasn't done, and it wasn't felt to be a need.
So which development is driving this? I mean, do we expect something, I mean, it's sat on the shelf for 3 years and now.
Well, the reason, nothing's driving it other than the fact, I'm driving it because I would like to get this in place, because this is a document, when we do have developers come in, it's good to have something to say, here it is. There's nothing other than the fact, I would have liked to have seen it done several years ago. I've been here a decade. There's a lot of stuff I would have liked to have seen done 8 years ago. We were unable to get to it.
But once this plan is in place, where, what is our authority to go beyond or be more restrictive, once you have a document like this? I mean, in other words.
Well, I think if you don't have a document like this, what's your authority to do anything other than bluff?
You could require things as you think they're needed. In this document, you have a recipe that you can't deviate from. And I mean, it sounds like it kind of ties the hands of council, because somebody can say, well, this is just like the planning commission document, I mean, the ordinances that they use. Now you've got a document that council can't really do anything about.
Well, you can take it, currently, you've got people, under what we have now is, you can't maybe do much of anything. This is a very reasonable document. It provides, as I say, the professionals involved in its preparation and review all deal with this stuff every day. This is considered state-of-the-art, practical, reasonable, effective measures.
I think one of the keys is having a document so that those coming in who wish to develop have some confidence in what is in place so that they can develop, as opposed to them coming in and fearing that it may change, based on a particular mood on a particular day.
That's correct.
And that, I think that's, for example, I know we use for building codes, we use the International Code, and I know that Overland Park, for example, went through and with a group of citizens, developers, and so on, went through that code and developed a code that provides for safety, but also is reasonable, and it's consistent, so they know that when they come in, they know exactly what it is that they can expect, to develop within a particular community. I think that helps from an economic development perspective to know that.
Right. It does avoid, developers always want to know what are the rules.
You didn't mention Overland Park in here. Did you say they?
Yeah, they have one, and they have a plan too.
Not this plan.
Well, this plan was basically looking at the Overland Park and, the Olathe and the Lee Summit, which are very good documents.
Why don't you think the other communities with land around them, such as Shawnee, why don't they have?
They have one. These are the ones we were looking at. It's just not a case of you go to some known examples so that they're all somewhat similar, and the Olathe and Lee Summits were fairly, from what we had researched earlier. Is that feedback or is that outside? I'm sorry. My hearing's so bad I couldn't tell if it was coming from here or outside, or what. Not at all. I'm not sure. But we had researched it, but those were the ones that we felt were the most comprehensive. But you could look at 100, you can look at 1,000. We looked at what we felt were the best in here.
But there'll be a cost to implement this.
There's a cost of everything. There's a cost not to implement.
Well, right. Do we have an idea what that cost will be?
We retain traffic engineers on a case-by-case basis. Usually sometimes they cost us between $500 and a couple of thousand for assistance, for professional services.
For each development?
That's all, yes.
And then the construction of medians and things like that, it'd be you know, if a developer comes and says, well, I want to put, you know, let's just use the area next to Casey's as an example. I want to put whatever, development in there, construct a building, and your development plan says that there has to be a median, in the middle of the road.
They do. If they change the use, they pay for it.
And there's also, as I say, the more remote it gets to the site, the more discussion can take place. And once again, since we don't have a specific policy on that front, it's something that can be brought in as a developer agreement for council to consider at the time of development approval. But
I think what you're saying, Mike, is if there's a plan already in place, not this plan, but a requirement for a median at a certain location, and then the developer whose land has changed its use, then applies, you know, for some sort of building permit in that area, then he would be required to pay for it. But there's going to be certain circumstances where you're going to have, you know, main thoroughfares where the plan isn't going to change. It's just going to be, now we have a document that we have to, someone has to pay for it.
well,
For all the reasons cited, for safety and traffic flow, and to have a code, much like a building code, to ensure that things are done the right way.
But not necessarily paid for by the developer.
well, I think to kind of, let's start out the easy answer. Okay, you have a right turn lane requirement. That's very contiguous and very directly related to that development. Very simple answer. You pay development. You start going into the transportation impact study identifies future issues at an intersection, or says that at the entrance and a signal is needed for this development, but it's triggered at some point that could be brought in by other development. Well, is it that guy's responsibility, or is it everybody in the area, or is it a shared cost between the parties driving
The need.
the need and the general public using the facility?
With the document like this, though, will we have the opportunity to review that case by case?
Absolutely.
And make sure that out
And-
and act on it the way that we suggest.
That's right.
You know?
Absolutely.
This
Okay.
document will provide us that information to make an intelligent decision.
Okay.
Instead of being ignorant,
Well, but
being surprised, we will have an intelligent way to do it.
who has the final authority in that? The planning commission, council?
Well, I think when dealing with, what,
Because we don't always get to weigh in on issues the planning commission makes decisions on, right?
bear with
Depends
me.
on
If it's funding, right? I mean, we're talking about abatements or joint funding issues or benefit districts.
I think it
I mean,
involves
if somebody
money.
just goes to the planning commission and says, I want to build Casey's, and there's nothing required as far as funding by the city or anything special, then no, but,
I think if it involves public funds, you all,
right.
Sure.
Planning commission has
It all
no
comes
funding
before the
authority.
council.
but if it
And of course,
involves-
this has the right for appeal. If the city imposes a guideline or within that code, and the developer says, well, I don't think it's necessary, and I don't want to pay for it because it's an unnecessary expense, they have the right to appeal to the city council, and you have the ultimate say.
Very good. What more needs to happen? Does it need to be finalized, or, I mean, other than just come before us?
All right, I need to prepare an ordinance that adopts it by reference and bring it back to you. The earliest I can get that on now would be the first meeting in May.
So, on that process, if the ordinance adopts it by reference, and there's a proposal to change the document, does it then have to come back for a new ordinance, or does it need to come back for approval as a document? Or does it need to be approved at all?
I think if you made a complete change to it, it would have to come back, a new ordinance would adopt a new document by reference.
Okay. But if you updated it, things change and
More realistically, I think that the next actions you would see down the line is to start reviewing, which is some things we need to do, is reviewing other parts of our code and coming back for revisions to bring the entirety of the code into conformance. Because there are areas that are in conflict that that just need to be worked through. They've evolved kind of like Main Street, and some work needs to happen. But short term, adopt this by reference with an ordinance. I think if you saw any sweeping changes, it'd be come back for an update.
Very good.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Our final item this evening, this was not ready when the original notice went out for this meeting. First Light Methodist Church wishes to develop a piece of ground at the corner of what is the extension of Buckeye and 175th. And there's some concerns about current plat requirements with respect to roadways and so on. So, Pastor, I'll turn it over to you.
Mayor Dravetta, members of the City Council, my name is Brad Wheeler. I'm the pastor of First Light United Methodist Church here in Gardner. I really want to say thank you to all of you for fitting us in tonight on your workshop agenda. Joining me tonight are a few members of our building team, as well as the Reverend Kent Melker. Kent is the District Superintendent for New Church Starts in the state of Kansas for the Methodist Church. So I'm hoping someday, if I'm a pastor long enough, I can have a title that long, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, thank you all for seeing us tonight. Before we get to the proposal, I just wanted to spend a minute or two and just kind of talk about First Light a little bit and let you all know a little bit about who we are and kind of a little bit about our history. I put out a handout for most of you. I think a lot of you got it here tonight. You'll see on our handout our mission statement as well as our vision statement. First Light began as a church worshiping in March 2005, almost exactly 7 years ago. We have worshiped all along at Gardner Edgerton High School. Our current worship attendance is around 170 people per week, reaching around 85 families in the Gardner area. Our mission, we are out to be a mission and community-oriented church. Just a couple of the things we have done, we work closely with the Gardner Multi-Service Center in a number of projects. We've established at the high school the First Light Assistance Program, and soon we are hoping to partner with Habitat for Humanity to start rehabilitating some houses around Gardner. So some really neat mission projects we have going there. We like to think that we have a very vibrant children's and youth ministry. We have lots of kids involved with First Light. Every week we have a large number of children that go to children's time and a large number of youth that are active in the youth group. Last year, in August of 2011, we formed First Light's building team. As I said earlier, we've been worshiping for 7 years in the high school, and what we're out to do is to find the place for us as a church. As we began that process, we started looking around at different plots of land around town, and the one that we came across that we would like to see as our future home is the land that we're going to be talking about tonight. As we think about, as the building team has been going about this process of looking at land and looking for places that we could go, a couple of things we were taking into consideration. With the first phase building, which is what we're hoping to get into first, just a simple multi-purpose facility. We probably would call it something like the First Light Youth and Children's Center. We want it to be focused around after-school programs, community meals, special events for youth on the weekends and during the week. And then, of course, it would be our worship space on Sunday morning. But we don't want to build a space that is just for worship. We want it to be a community-oriented first phase building. Ultimately, what we're really looking to build with that first phase is basically a children and youth Christian community center. That's what we're hoping to do. And so tonight I come here before you with a proposal. As we have looked around, we have found a piece of land that we feel suits our needs and what we are looking to do. We feel it is the piece of land that would help us live out our vision in the best way. As Mayor Dravetta stated, the piece of land that we're looking at, it would be essentially at the intersection of Buckeye or Poplar, whichever road we would like to call that, and 175th, just to the east of the Waverly Point housing addition. I submitted a few slides. Are those in here somewhere?
There's something called option C
option D.
Yeah, let's try option D, please.
D dot.
Yes. If I can get this up here. Okay, there we go. Just a little bit of helping us think about and orient to where what we're talking about here. The roadway that you see going through that would be on the east side of the property there, we're looking hard because I can't point at anything. Thank you very much, appreciate that. That would be Buckeye, or actually the road just over a little bit, right there, thank you. That would be the road that is projected to go in, that would be Buckeye or Poplar. And then to the, up on the screen there, you'll see another road that goes through the property. That's the east-west road that I'll be talking about in just a moment. This plot of land is 11.48 acres. It would suit our needs in great ways. The thing that we are here tonight to talk about and to discuss are the roads that need to be built around this piece of property. Right now on the current plat for this piece of property, the east-west road there at the top is platted to go in, as well as the north-south road is platted to go in. If this would be our perfect option for us, where the north-south road is. It's currently platted to move out a ways and would connect, well, a lot closer to where you would see Meadowbrook Hospital down there at the very bottom of the screen. It would connect in another place. Is there another slide there? Is there one more slide that would show the east-west road being cul-de-sac? Yeah, let's try that. Here we go. So this would be the same layout with the east-west road cul-de-sac. Tonight, as I come here, and this would obviously be the optimal way that we would like to see the land work out. From a church planning standpoint, what you're always looking for is somewhere between 8 and 10 acres to be able to build on. As you see, this plot of land right here, that would give us 9.5 acres with which to build on. And so basically I come tonight with 4 basic questions that we need clarification on and need help in determining so that we can determine whether to move forward with this piece of land. We do, by the way, have a letter of intent on this land, so time is kind of the essence for us in determining this. The first and probably the biggest question that we need to discuss is the east-west road there at the kind of towards the top of the screen. We would like to propose that road be cul-de-saced. The property and houses to the, let's see, that would be the west of that, is the Waverly Point addition. I believe a lot of that has already been built out, and this road was originally platted in here with houses on both sides of the road. And so that would be our first question is, could this road be cul-de-sac? I have a couple of more questions. Do we want to just take each question and discuss them as we go along? That be okay? Okay. So that would be our first question. What would we need to do to think about this road, this east-west road being cul-de-sac? Or what would be the ins and outs of that?
I guess we ought to hear staff at first. Yeah.
Bear with me. Oops.
Pastor, you currently own land or have options on land on Kill Creek Road, is that correct?
We do, yes. And that was part of our building team process. That land was bought, I believe it was 6 years ago, something like that?
2006.
2006, thank you, Ken. It is currently owned by the United Methodist Church. At the beginning of this process, they allowed us to look around again and to see what we could find, and if we could find a piece of land that would better fit the vision and mission of our church, then they wanted us to go ahead and explore that. So, yeah, we do have land out there, but this is what we want to. This is where we're hoping to get in at. So.
Kind of just a little background. We've had several. Excuse me. Yes.
Yeah.
Pastor Wheeler and church representatives and staff have had several discussions over the last. I'm not sure when you all began. It was possibly.
Probably, let's see, about 5 months ago.
Right,
Yeah.
it's been going on for a while. One of the issues is a fairly small picture, but on our development plan, the road in question is the extension of Buckeye. Here's the site, and the extension of Buckeye through up past the school district down to 175th Street. What figures into this is, as part of the US 56 corridor study, the recommended long-range plan, which was based on the original development and the preliminary plat for Waverly Point, also trying to provide access to the Meadowbrook Hospital, proposed taking this intersection, as you all may recall, ultimately with future traffic patterns, Santa Fe Street will become the main arterial, as will Waverly. US 56, as long as it remains US 56, will come up. At some point, a roundabout will take it up to Santa Fe. One of the issues is access to the hospital, access to the driveway or the extension of Buckeye as per the preliminary plat, and also the proximity of Poplar Street to the south. With this arrangement, because it's a T intersection, you basically do not have competing or conflicting left turns. In this case, left turns onto Poplar will come, dump off, go down Poplar Street. Since this is a three-way intersection, there will be no left turns in opposition as lefts into the hospital. Additionally, left turns onto Buckeye can be handled by basically a two-way left turn lane. This is a fairly crude drawing that shows what is currently developed. The property that the church is very interested in is outlined in green. The property recently acquired by the school district is shown in blue. The extension of Buckeye goes through one of the tracks acquired by the school district, follows through, this is per the preliminary plat, comes down to an intersection more or less in line with the hospital entrance, cul-de-sac here, a connection to Pecan, which comes across as Washington with another cul-de-sac. With the church's desire for this property, needless to say, a roadway through the middle pretty much chops the property up for them. It's possible to relocate the road to the east side of the property. We have visited, after a meeting we had on actually January 19, visited with KDOT. They're amenable to amending their plan with some analysis showing what the impacts would be. One issue we do have along the east side of this property is utility easements. There's a force main or a sanitary sewer. There's an existing electric line, so the road can only go so close to the east side of the property. Some of the issues that we back up again. Hang on here. This road, one of the issues we've discussed on this road is the fact we do have currently a very large cul-de-sac. Granted, the preliminary plat has changed through time through the school district action. However, until the west side of this property develops, this will remain a very large cul-de-sac. The viability, I'm certainly very sympathetic to the church's concerns about this roadway. However, this does provide additional relief and circulation for this existing residential area. Ultimately, this intersection, be it coming in per the US 56 plan, or if a revised plan can be approved, will ultimately be signalized and will provide access for this residential area to a signalized intersection on what will ultimately become a very busy roadway. So those are the issues that we see and have discussed.
Is Pear Street, ultimately with development of 175th, would that be a right-in, right-out, or would that be full access.
So, see if I can back this up. I've got more adept. Pierce Street is showing to be a full access
Full access,
with a
okay.
based on,
Go ahead, no, go ahead, Dan.
I was just saying, based on, what we see, it would be a staff recommendation not to build the east-west road. Granted, the plans have changed, but still the traffic patterns have not. However, I am very sympathetic and understanding of the church's concerns about that roadway.
I guess from my perspective, as long as this land sits vacant, it's, at least right now, it's fairly obvious that it's not going to be developed as residential in the near-term future. The developer's trying to get rid of it. So the traffic flows that we see within that subdivision today are likely the ones that we'll see for quite some time. So when I met with Pastor, that's why I didn't see the criticalness of that through. I mean, I understand if it's residential, if we're putting residential there, but if it's one owner of this property who's going to build it, I don't see how it's going to be significantly different than what we see today.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the residential is done. If there's still going to be commercial development at the corner of 75th and Waverly, which is, I think, what it's supposed to be for all intents and purposes. I mean, we're not adding more rooftops in there.
Right, I think, I think Waverly Point, for the most part, is built out. I think there's still a few more townhouses to go in for the most part.
I think there's some, there's more to go. I can't give you.
To the west, there's more.
To the west.
To the west,
Right.
there's
And then
more.
there's the commercial piece.
And then there would be a second road that would be built with those other pieces.
And
Right.
that would provide access to the west, and
Right.
that's the counterpoint to the position of
Right.
the need for the road.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
And I guess, it appears that, your recommendation would be to build the road, but that's basically due to the plans that are already in place and you don't have any real objections to cul-de-sacing here, do you, or?
I think one concern just would be access and egress on an emergency situation. You've got one way in to an awful lot of homes,
But that's what it is right now, though, isn't it, Mike?
and I think for the future, it's why there is opportunity to provide relief and provide more than one way in and out of all those homes and all that property.
But that would be done when we develop the west side of it with the commercial property.
Could be.
Right.
Let's open
So we can
access.
open it up off of Waverly to access into that area.
That's correct. So that's the counterpoint.
The only thing this does, the road, is it provides these folks a way to Madison.
Which they don't have right now, and they didn't have when they bought their homes.
Right, but I mean, from the standpoint of, as this builds down here, if you've got large commercial, it provides them a different route. I mean, that's really what it essentially gives to the existing homeowners.
That's the real, I did have a question as we looked at both.
Yes.
Let's say the road was developed as it's in the plan right now, and I know there's that 64th of an acre parcel set there. Has there been any conversations with the school district to perhaps purchase that piece of land, since it would actually be most critical to them with access to the practice fields, and your plot would be smaller,
Right.
but still within that 8 to 10 threshold?
Right, yeah. Just very preliminary, yeah, we've just discussed it, but I don't know if that would be a possibility or not. I wouldn't rule it out, but yeah, I would think that might be a possibility, yeah.
Has this issue been before the planning commission then, or seems kind of premature?
Well, I'll actually speak up. I met with him, Pastor called me, and I don't know if he's met with some other council members as well, specifically because the cost of this road, that this particular item could deter them from buying the property. And so, as we were talking about it, because this was deemed as residential, like I said, I totally understand why the road was there. His question was, you know, this is a make or break for them. How do we how are decisions made now about changing kind of the original plans of that? So I actually suggested that he call Mike and get on a work session because I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I'm sure we have a lot of designs out there that if the property is bought by somebody who wishes to develop differently, how is that handled? Because initially, I mean, do we really want, you know, First Light or anybody else to have to pay, you know, $15,000 or $20,000 to have an engineer redesign and provide all the study information to get this road taken out? When the land's not being purchased for the intent that it originally was, I guess, designed for.
And that was sort of what I approached Christie with, and those of you that I've met with, was the cost of going out and hiring an engineer to study all this, and then to say whether those roads need to go in or not. It's a pretty exorbitant cost for a church, and so that's why I was kind of asking the question: is there a way for us to look at this without taking that step, or before taking that step, I guess?
And this is a permitted use for this piece of property?
I believe it is. I'm sorry, I have not heard it's not. I'm not an expert.
I believe churches are.
Churches have certain privileges under zoning.
Right.
I don't know exactly what the details are.
I think usually
They do
residential is fine, usually. I don't think it has to
Residential is fine,
be rezoned.
But I know that from a zoning perspective, churches do have certain privileges in state law.
Sure.
So if I understand you correctly, then you're asking not for us to pay for the road, but...
Well, I was going to discuss that in a little bit and see what we can talk about. Yes, that's my next question. My first thing, though, is this road, is this east-west road. This is the thing that's really going to be difficult for us. And that's what I wanted to know tonight was exactly how do we go about making sure that that's cul-de-sac, that sort of thing. The other thing is, this is under letter of intent for us and not for much longer. And so we're kind of moving to that point to where we need to make concrete decisions on this. And so that's kind of why we came here tonight. So.
I mean, again, just as I said with the school district, the developer pays for the roads, right? And
But he's just asking, are we...
I'm just asking, first of all, on the east-west road. Yeah.
Right, that's the
Right.
question.
Yeah.
The first question is the cul-de-sac...
Is it possible just to do the cul-de-sac? That's what I want to know.
necessary, because there has to be some way to
Emergency
turn traffic around.
Right.
So the cul-de-sac is a minimum required, right? And so, is that sufficient for this development as proposed is the question.
Well, I think with the feasibility and the viability of having an entrance off of Waverly into the west side, I think putting a cul-de-sac in here is perfectly fine.
That's my opinion as well.
Agreed.
So that would be the consensus then of the majority is that the cul-de-sac option would be sufficient and that council would approve the modification that would remove that road, knowing that it hasn't been before the planning commission, et cetera, right?
Right, and we're fine with taking those steps.
Right.
We're just trying to get a feel for what the council was thinking on that before we move forward. So.
Okay.
so you're wanting to not have a road go through there as proposed, but ending the road, the existing road with the cul-de-sac.
Yes.
And the reason, I guess, I'm still trying to figure out, what's the reason for that? The rationale is?
Well, we're trying to get to where, on this piece of land, the document that's up now, shows a cul-de-sac there. It gives us more land to be able to use, first of all. And second of all, which, when we get to the costs in just a minute, I mean, that's a whole nother, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know costs, but we're talking about a few $100,000, probably more, that we would, as a church, if we have to pay for the roads, that we would have to be responsible for. So to us, that was what was the real deal breaker, was if that road had to go in and we had to pay for it, I mean, to pay, let's put it this way, to pay for that road as well as the north-south road in total would be
behind.
many
the
times
bus.
more than what we're even gonna pay for the land. So, yes. Okay. All right, I'll just move through my list here. Then the second question I had, and I know there's not really a way for us to come to a consensus on this or even to really talk much about it tonight, would be, we know the north-south road has to go in. Frankly, we're okay with that. I mean, that gives, just what we were saying about that housing addition, that would give them access to Madison, and, I mean, that's great for us too. The question that we would want to be able to work with is the location of where that comes out, and David did a very nice job of laying that out, and I appreciate that. And I know we probably can't even determine too much of that until KDOT comes back and officially says what they're gonna be doing and those sorts of things, if I'm correct on that, yeah.
And I know, question for you all, I know I think Jeff had communicated with KDOT. Have you all submitted something to them?
We had been talking with them a little bit, but we had never gotten back with them yet, no.
Because
no.
it would be a
Yeah.
partnership.
That was gonna be another huge chunk of money with the engineer that we have just not, we haven't said yes to yet, so, yes. Right now, all we're trying to do is figure out whether we wanna buy the land or not, so we haven't quite gotten that far yet. So, but that would be, at least down the line, something that we would like to consider, is where would that north-south road come out, be able to line up at on 175th Street. And then, the third question, as we've already kind of touched on a little bit here, is paying for the road. Yes, I understand it looks like as we buy this, it looks like we are a developer. However, we are a church. Just in giving up the land, we are giving up a pretty significant amount of money to the city just to have the right-of-way for the road. So I guess my question would be this. Could we just give the right-of-way up and let the city build the road when the road needs to go in? Like the school district. I believe that's the agreement with the school district, and I understand it's a different dynamic. So that would be my question that I would just like to discuss for a moment.
I'll weigh in. The challenge I see is that we're stepping off then on a policy decision.
We already have with the school district, so.
But the school district's a taxing entity. It's a different situation. We're stepping off and saying with a non-for-profit,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of religious affiliation, that if a non-for-profit chooses to build and there is need for road, we will build it. The taxpayers will build that. That's the policy. So it's a bigger decision than a cul-de-sac. The agreements that we strike with the school district on the 50/50s and so on, those are two taxing entities. It's a different scenario than with a private entity. I mean, with private entities, what we've done is, we have a mechanism for allocating future taxes to put to the road, but in this particular case, obviously, we don't have that.
Right.
There's no future revenues
Sure.
to come in to allocate to building that road.
What's gonna drive the need for that road?
That's where I'm at. I'm
Yeah,
just not even sure that we even need the road, why we need the road in the first place.
As long as you have access off of, whatever that road is.
175th, I believe.
Right, I mean, from your perspective,
Yeah.
as long as you have access in there, so I guess I'm trying to understand what's gonna drive the need for that road?
But we don't empty onto arterials, right, with
Right.
developments. Which is what this plan that we're gonna vote on in 1st of May talks about.
Well, what you have, if you go back to this drawing, I'm sorry it's not larger, but, here's the road in question. Currently, the only way, the school is served by an entrance here off of Madison, off of Waverly. This has always been shown as the collector to link to US 56, 175th Street. Obviously, more improvements are needed there someday. The only way you can get to the school from this area here is either through the neighborhoods or over and around. purpose of this is to provide the continuity through the center of the section. It's been a matter of record for many years and is part of the circulation for the city. So does it serve the church? No. However, the church, any developer the owner of a property is responsible for getting the collector through their property. So in this case, unfortunately for the church, they're a church and not a for-profit operation, but still the city would look to the property owner to build that section of road. Let me see if I can make this go away. Hang on. Yeah. One problem, and I point out too, and I think we have to stay a certain distance away from the west line of this property due to the existing utilities. Some issues with putting the roadway too close are short-term. Currently, this is a Y intersection. Westbound traffic, as you all recall, just goes along a single lane. It's double lane to here, then the eastbound traffic goes to the T. If this was to go in, it would basically be right at this intersection. It's offset it appears to be too close to the utilities. Also, how would this intersection be configured until something else happens? Short term, it's not a terribly workable solution. The whole intersection would have to be rebuilt ideally. With this intersection, if it was stayed closer to its original position, at least it would be opening out onto a two-lane roadway. So there would be more opportunities for that interim situation. I think those are the main issues. The other option that we talked about would be possibly crowd the east line and then bring it over here as far as possible, once again rendering some land, same situation they're running into up here.
Again, it's a north-south access point that is planned, that we don't have currently, you're right, but it is a planned north-south access. And if you look at the points throughout the city, we do have those elsewhere. White Drive is an example off of Madison. White Drive actually is planned to go through from Madison to 167.
The case with the Baptist church is, because of the way the intersection is White Drive north of the vacant ground is offset to the west, it would have to curve across property owned by other owners. The compromise to go ahead and allow the Baptist church to proceed was they're building the south half of the road along their alignment. They're having to acquire an easement for basically the west half of the roadway from that adjacent property owner. When the adjacent property developed, that property owner will be required to extend white the rest of the distance up to the existing connection. Probably the easiest of the four questions to answer is, can you phase them? And the phasing can be worked out as a good case in point with the Baptist church. So that can be done. It's conceivable that construction of this roadway could be delayed if it could be served with an entrance off of existing 175th Street. With access management, that entrance would have to be pushed toward the west end of the property to provide clearance from that future intersection. But that's also quite doable, so it would allow them for a phased development. With regard to the north-south roadway, is it needed today? Well, maybe, maybe not, but if you let it go now, close it out, the opportunity's done. So,
if it is needed in the future, then it's back with condemnation for acquisition and it's full cost of development, and the cost really goes up. So that's the issue.
Are these all buildings or some of the parking lots or?
Well, what we have, and this is just our architect taking a stab at what it might look like, The dotted lines are parking lots. The bold, dark lines are buildings. What we would probably propose is one of those two longer, not the square piece, but the longer rectangle pieces. One of those would be Phase 1, which would be the Family Life Center that we're looking at. Phase 2 would probably be the big square that would be some sort of worship center, at least. That's what we're thinking. And then we move on from there with Phase 3. So, yes.
I kind of feel like you've probably gotten your answer on the cul-de-sac.
Right.
I don't, speaking for myself, I don't know that I'm ready to tell you one way or another on the north-south lane, but
Right.
it sounds like you all are prepared to undertake it, even if the city's not participating on the north-south. Maybe you should move forward thinking conservatively that that's the kind of money you're going to have to spend. And,
Right. Right. Sure.
See where the situation takes us.
One question I had, I know
Mhm.
the policy generally from the Catholic Church's perspective is once owned, never sold. I mean, that's the,
Once the land is owned, it's
yeah,
never sold?
once owned, never sold.
Okay.
So, for example, we had talked about, at one time, the southern piece of Sacred Heart, of doing something different, getting Waverly and 56 and buying that, trading off to expand West Side. And that was not ever, it was never even entertained that would be the case. But in the case of, obviously you own land now, you're proposing to sell it.
Yes.
From a development perspective, assuming, wishing growth.
Mm-hmm.
But
Hoping.
if growth didn't
Yes.
happen,
Yeah.
if you remained at 110, 85 to 110 families,
Mhm.
120 families and so on.
Yes.
And did not need to develop, would you subdivide and sell at some point, or would you just retain that land forever and ever, maintain it and so on? I mean, and I don't know if you
Yeah,
can give me an answer.
I would say, I would not put any options, I wouldn't say no to any options at this point. And we do not have a policy of, we own it, we buy it, and it's forever and ever. So, depends on where the future takes us. So yeah, I would not be able to say
that would be
anything about it.
another consideration or concern I have is if it develops,
Mhm.
completely, that's one thing, but if it only develops partially, and you don't need 10 acres, but you can
Right.
survive with
5 or 6 or something, yeah.
what happens to the rest in the access point there, so, that's my other
Sure.
thought, another concern there.
Sure. Okay. So, is there any process by which we can talk about the cost of the road? I mean, is it just that we as a church would have to pay for the road? Is that what I'm hearing? Just want to be clear before I...
Yeah, I think that's it. Now, I think really the process question is, can it be phased and how can all of that be managed?
I think the easy answer, like I've indicated, is phasing.
Mhm.
I think that's something that can be worked with. The harder answers are where to put the intersection. There's a lot of issues involved.
Right.
All of them pertain to, trying to balance the private use to the greater good, the public good. And there's going to be a lot of traffic using this roadway someday.
And again, the KDOT consideration, which you weren't able to delve into in great depth.
Exactly,
but
right.
They're going to have some interest
Yeah.
that could be quite compelling.
Yeah, so, the options that could swing over here, we know will work for the traffic, obviously.
Right.
Might require moving some things around since the cul-de-sac issue, an answer has been given. It might allow a different utilization of the northern part of the property, and therefore, instead of dead land up here, down here with maybe some overflow parking or some other use.
Right.
So that would basically allow the KDOT plan to remain intact, allow an access point where, it will work short-term and long-term. is, once again, this in the short term, without a total improvement of both sides of the intersection, would